I won't take too much of time, but the first time when I really understood disaster was when I witnessed the 2004 tsunami, which devastated so many people's lives. And I see that even today, so many people, communities who are hit by cyclone, and they're still bearing the brunt of tsunami even now. It's not so. I understand the importance and need for these discussions and deliberations, and most importantly, the investments in infrastructure to help these communities survive and move along. I would quickly like to introduce the very distinguished panelists here. Mr. Firat Sunel, the Ambassador of Turkey. Ambassador Sunel has a distinguished career in diplomacy and law. His extensive diplomatic experience, multilingual abilities, and literary contributions reflect his deep expertise and commitment to international relations. He is the author of 3 novels, one of which was adapted to TV series. He is also the author of the book, Law of Treaties, from the Practitioner's Perspective, published in Turkish. Our next panelist is Dr. Amal Lee Amin. She is the Managing Director and Head of Climate Diversity and Advisory in the British International Investment. Dr. Amal Lee is a leading advocate for sustainable development. She has made important contributions to climate finance and policy, including advising the UK's COP26 presidency. Dr. Amal Lee has significant expertise in advancing global sustainability efforts. Our next panelist, Mr. Kamal Kishore, is a member and head of the department of India's National Disaster Management Authority, and he is the co-chair of ICDRI's executive committee. Kamal has dedicated his career to disaster risk reduction and recovery, and was recently appointed by the UN Secretary General to the position of Assistant Secretary General and Special Representative of the Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction, UNDRR, a position that he will take up later in this year. Ms. Kanta Singh has over 25 years of experience in the management of pro-women development programs. Kanta has worked with national and international organizations to promote women in formal economy, sports, and politics. In her last assignment with UNDP, where she spent 9 years, she was also a Chevening Gurukul Fellow from the University of Oxford. Our next panelist, Dr. Claudine Ogaldez-Cruz, she specializes in defense, security, and risk management. She is also into technical design and implementation of institutions, knowledge, and practice in participatory action methodologies for conflict management and transformation processes. She has a doctorate in sociology and political science. Mr. Rowan Douglas, he's the CEO of Hoden Group. He's a prominent figure in climate risk management and resilience. His leadership in creating innovative solutions and fostering collaboration among industry leaders has significantly impacted climate resilience efforts globally. Our next panelist, Mr. Cohen Doyens, he is the Director General of International Partnerships at the European Commission. He plays a crucial role in shaping the Commission's development policy abroad. His background in diplomacy and international politics offers him an intricate understanding of global partnerships and development strategies. I would now move along, and we would open up a discussion and also have questions for these experts, and we would like to touch upon aspects of how is the financing working in the disaster risk reduction, and how are we investing for resilience and more like infrastructure for with respect to infrastructure, what exactly, where are we heading to, and what has been done in the last so many years with rising disasters that we see. So I'm looking forward to interact with each of our panelists, and I'm sure all of us would learn from what they have to say. Thank you. So I would, am I audible? Yeah. So I would first invite Mr. Firat Sunil, and I would like to know from you, as in from the 2023 earthquake that happened. After the 2023 earthquake that happened, what have been the proactive measures that have so Mr. Firat Sunil, from you, I would like to understand, like, the 2023 earthquake that happened. Since that, in the last 1 year, what have been the proactive measures that have taken place with respect to, not audible? Okay. Yeah. What are the kind of measures that you have taken for resilience, and particularly looking at infrastructure investments after the event? So if you could share your insights on that, it'll be great.
Okay, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I think earthquakes are the most dangerous and worst of all natural disasters because of the unpredictability of the moment. Some early warning mechanisms have been developed for tsunamis, hurricanes, tornadoes, etc., but not for the earthquakes. You know, an enormous energy shakes just in the middle of the night at home, and then everything falls to the ground and you can't do anything. But in tsunami, for example, you still have some time, minutes, to escape to the higher grounds. Or in storm, you can just reinforce your windows or doors and just be in your home and wait for it to go. But it is really very devastating in case of earthquakes. So such early mechanism or such precautions can minimize the effect, the scope of the damage. But to alleviate the risk, there is only way to go. This is to build resistant, resilient cities. So the earthquake shook Turkey last year in February. This is one of the most devastating ones in the Republic's history in terms of the scope, magnitude, which was 7.7, focal depth, and the destruction it caused, and of course the death toll. So the focal depth being only 7 kilometers below the surface multiplied the effect of the earthquake, impacting 14 million people and destructed 11 cities in the region, which is equivalent to 110,000 square kilometers. It is 3 times larger than the size of Denmark, the Switzerland, and the Netherlands, larger than Portugal, and as big as the size of England. So 50,000 people, more than 50,000 people, died during the earthquakes last year. And the number of wrecked buildings are more than 500,000. And not only buildings, but major communication and energy infrastructures were also damaged. So total burden for the earthquakes to the country is more than 100 million US dollars. 3.3 million people displaced, and more than 2 million people sheltered in tents camps or containers. So this is really a very huge, it was a huge devastation for Turkey. And all these figures show us why we call those disasters as the disasters of the century. But, ladies and gentlemen, keep in mind, the century is not over yet. And we are anticipating even more destructive natural disasters in the future. So, emergency response constitutes only one side of the problem. But a vision and long-term planning is needed to prevent future large-scale disasters. So what we are trying to do is to conduct a comprehensive urban transformation and building disaster-resilient cities. So this is the most important thing. So in the light of this perspective, the Turkish government has announced ambitious reconstruction plans, including a commitment to rebuild all damaged residential housing. So, alongside its own analysis, the government of the Republic of Turkey collaborates with UNDP, European Union, and World Bank to draft an assessment, what we call Post-Disaster Needs Assessment, PDNA. So based on this post-disaster need assessment, PDNA methodology, we outlined the Turkey Earthquake Recovery and Reconstruction Assessment Report. In short, the TERRA report. The details of the TERRA report you can find in our website, so that's why I will not go through, but just give you some aspects about this report, which is very important. So, TERRA report comprises of an assessment of the financial impact of the earthquakes, applying modified PDNI methodology and a recovery vision. This report recommends a range of changes in construction standards and regulatory policies to ensure the settlement across the country, both those newly constructed and already existing ones are resilient to earthquakes and other disasters. The TERRA report also outlines a set of key principles to ensure that the recovery from the earthquake is resilient, inclusive, green, and sustainable. So, the report provides some initial recommendation for key priorities for social, economic, infrastructural, and environmental recovery. Short, medium, and long-term actions to be considered by the government of Turkey, local institutions, private sector, and civil society to supported by international actors. Putting these guiding principles into practice will be paramount to ensure that recovery efforts are adequate to the scale of needs. So my last words. So despite the TERRA report focus on the earthquakes and aftermath in February earthquakes in Turkey, it also presents compatible guidelines for other disasters, natural disasters all over the world. And so this can be also a guideline for other regions as well. We are ready to share our experience in this regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's very interesting that you touched upon the TERRA report, and I think it's also important to look at modifications or changes in the way we look at how we deal with disasters and how can we create a situation where it can be better handled, right? Like for futuristic situations. Thank you so much for your, and it's also very important that you mentioned how other countries could use this as a model for such kind of disasters. I think that's very important. I would like to invite Dr. Amal Lee Amin, to talk about like how can the private sector investment accelerate, these kind of projects, especially when we are talking about lower and middle income countries, and also like the Prime Minister's remark about the small island countries, which are often largely ignored, and they are the ones who bear the brunt of it, and they also lack investment. So I would like to hear from you about that.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this invitation, particularly to Amit for extending the invitation to myself and British International Investment. Just in case you're not aware of us, we are a development finance institute, the UK, owned by the UK government, and also an impact investor. So we only invest in private investments, mainly in Africa and South Asia, India being actually the biggest part of our existing portfolio. We're formerly known as CDC, which may be more familiar to some of you. And so we work very closely with the private sector and try to bring the private sector into particularly new sectors or to overcome new challenges, particularly those challenges for development. And so we have our own approach towards how we think about some of these issues. Now, broadly speaking, when thinking about resilience, we look at that in two main ways. We have a climate strategy, and under that we have three pillars, and one of the key pillars is climate adaptation and resilience. And so we take what we call a two-pronged approach. We look to ensure resiliency of all our investments, as well as how we can invest more in the types of technologies and solutions that can enable resilience in other sectors or in infrastructure, of course, being critical. Also, we invest directly into projects, but we also make a lot of our investments via financial institutions, whether equity investment or debt, as well as via funds. And we're actually primarily, we make equity investments. So compared to many other DFIs, we have a much larger proportion of equity investment, which is also much more risk-bearing type of investment. So already we're thinking very much about how we integrate these types of risks alongside our wider approach to risk. And we have a whole range of internal processes underway. But I want to talk a little bit about how we're collaborating with others, because I think that is probably of particular relevance to this discussion and this event. So at the end of 2020, we were thinking about how could we increase our ambition on these to bring more finance into the resilient infrastructure, but also for agriculture, and what would really be needed to accelerate private investment, not just our own, but other private sector. And it became quite clear that actually there are still quite a lot of barriers in this space. And what we came to a very quick conclusion is that we really needed to be collaborating with others. So very much, as I think we've heard already this morning, that we need to really quite rapidly and urgently address a number of key factors that are going to be key to increasing private investment into these types of solutions and services. So first of all, we launched an initiative with some other DFIs like ourselves, DFIs, but also have some multilateral development banks and bilateral development agencies who work with governments too, and are focused in three main areas. Now, the first, and we just released our report last week on this, is what are the types of metrics that are needed to help demonstrate where we are delivering on adaptation and resiliency. As the development finance community, we've really been tracking our adaptation purely in terms of dollars or euros or pounds, and we haven't been looking so much at what is the resiliency and adaptation outcomes and impact. And yet we know that private investors, so particularly those institutional investors and those who are now increasingly concerned about climate risk, not least because of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure and all the various initiatives that are underway globally that are starting to require disclosure of climate risk, it becomes really critical that we have the right kind of metrics that talk to investors. So we launched this report last week. We set out how we as the DFI community are thinking about these types of metrics and how we can best demonstrate impact that we know investors will, other private commercial investors need to have comfort over. The second area, and this is particularly relevant to some of the discussions so far here, is how do we come together to promote a more common approach towards how we look at physical climate risk and resiliency opportunities. So whether that's identifying, managing, but also critically reporting on physical climate risk. And there we've been working to produce, and we will have a report that will come out hopefully in June this year, that basically sets out how we are, what kinds of tools we can use and what kind of methodologies and approaches can help produce a more harmonized common set of data. Now, the data, we all know, I mean, as Amit said, data is absolutely essential to this. And we know that there is also a need for us to be producing data in a more consistent way to ensure greater coherency across data sets. So this guidance and the approaches that we're promoting should also help generate better data, as well as enable us to integrate this data internally into our own systems. And that is very much thinking both what we do both at the pre-investment stage, where we identify what is the inherent risks, but also recognizing as development finance institutions, we also can bring, we can engage with companies, with the infrastructure developers to help build their capabilities to understand and better address risk. So then we would be more focused on what is the residual risk associated with that. And likely we would anticipate that we wouldn't want to walk away because we see there's a lot of inherent risk, and rather we need to focus on ensuring we can reduce as much as possible so that the residual risk is really as low as it possibly can be. And then the third area is really around capital mobilization, and that one is obviously critical. We felt that the other two work streams on metrics, physical risk assessment, were key to enabling that, which is why we focus mostly on those two. But we are very focused on this third work stream. The first, and we will have a report coming out again in June, is looking at very much in these sort of early stage types of solutions that are needed, the types of investments and companies that can help bring the services to enable resilience of other sectors in the infrastructure space, but also in agriculture space. We've seen a lot of these really innovative companies here in India, particularly around Bangalore. So we have, through our venture capital strategy, we've invested in quite a few companies that are combining fintech, the climate tech, fintech, agtech, that are able to bring a lot of resiliency to the agriculture sector and smallholder farmers in particular here, but also in terms of infrastructure. And then just moving on to the third area of focus that we at BII have been really trying to address both internally but also in terms of how we can engage with others is this, as we heard earlier, and it was just wonderful to hear, just filled with all in sort of like-minded people here to hear, and particularly the Principal Secretary talking about, well, it's not just about assets and projects, but it's really about systems now. We really need to think about how we promote resiliency at a system-wide level. And what we looked at, and one example of some work that we produced last year, is what we referred to as our care for water approach, climate adaptation and renewable energy for the water sector. And this emerged out of a lot of focus of some work, of some possible investments we were thinking of making in the water sector in Egypt. And it became very, very quickly very apparent that we could not demonstrate that the individual projects were going to really contribute towards resiliency of the water sector or the water system without understanding where the risks exist across the system and where the opportunities to address those. And I just want to highlight one element here, which I think is really important when thinking about the system level approach, and also when we think about the scale of investment, but the type of investment that is needed. We also need to recognize that sometimes resiliency may be better improved by demand-side measures. I think in the agriculture sector, we saw this particularly in Egypt, where how do you enhance more productivity of water? So again, a company here in India that we have invested in that is bringing precision agriculture techniques can actually enable much more productive use of water as well as fertilizer and other inputs to actually increase the productivity of farmers. This is going to be key to increasing the resiliency of the water sector in countries that are going to be facing water scarcity. So just wanted to highlight when we think about this systems approach that we need to think about different types of solutions, services and technologies, and not only think about the big infrastructure, but also those services that can enable system-wide resiliency.
Thank you, Dr. Amal. I think that was very interesting because you talked about data and how we need to generate more data. You also talked about collaborative work, which is very, very essential because we can't work isolatedly in different departments anymore. And also, I think the most important thing you talked about is how we need to invest in different, like agri-tech, in fintech, because all of these are interconnected. We don't just have to look at infrastructure in a larger perspective, but also look at various linkages like this to get to where we are, right? Thank you so much for your very valuable inputs. I would now have a question for Mr. Kamal Kishore. How do we think in the long run, how can we develop strategies for resilience in the long run? And from your experience, like what is it that you have seen and what is it that you are looking at when we talk about long-term resilience?
Thank you very much, Shada, for that question. Long-term resilience, how do we work towards that? That's really an essay-type question, and we've got only 64 minutes. So, a part of the essay has been written by Amal Lee. So, it rhymes very nice, Amal Lee and then Kamal. So, but there are three things that I would say in summary, and then I'll try to unpack it in the 63 minutes that we've got. The first is better risk analytics, to which Amali also spoke. And the second is sustained investment in capacities. And the third is money, more money, better designed money. On risk, so let me unpack all of these a little bit. On risk analytics, I think it is really important that we use better risk information, more understandable, actionable, usable in imagining futures infrastructure. When we talk about benefits from investing in infrastructure, we really have to look at risk-adjusted returns. So if we are building airports and we are counting benefits of building those airports, we have to look at what is the kind of physical disaster and climate risk it is going to be exposed to, and what are the costs of not mitigating that risk. So I think that's really important that we bring risk analytics into assessing or presenting the benefits of investment in infrastructure systems. And that makes a case for investment in resilience. It also helps create a social demand for resilience. So we should, like our people, our communities should be asking not just more infrastructure, but also more dependable services. The second thing I would say is capacities. I think the capacities that we have to imagine 21st century infrastructure are simply not there. We are either great engineers or great financiers or great planners or great environmentalists or great social scientists, but we do not know how to bring together these disciplines. If we have to talk about infrastructure systems and not assets, we have to have these interdisciplinary capacities that we do not have. We need to have systems of governance to actually use these capacities to strengthen systems for managing risk in infrastructure systems. And countries that have made this long-term investment have reaped the benefits. You know, there was some discussion about earthquakes in Turkey. We also have other examples. We have Luis here from Chile. 1960, the largest earthquake ever recorded in human history occurred in Chile. And devastating, hundreds of thousands of people died. 2010, a similar, very large earthquake, the kinds of earthquakes we have not yet seen in Asia in the last 30, 40 years. And, you know, a dramatic decrease in losses. The system responded very effectively. Losses were contained to a huge extent, completely different order of magnitude. All of that happened because there are no shortcuts. They invested in capacities to have building codes, to have engineers at the right level, to actually use those building codes, have monitoring systems, accountability frameworks, and so on. So I think it's really important. I mean, this whole thing of capacity for 21st century infrastructure is something that is really something perhaps ICDRI 2025 can focus on, is something we really need to think about more deeply. And third and final is the issue of finance, the issue of money. We have colleagues here. I see Charlie Benson here formerly from Asian Development Bank, and several others, colleagues from ADPC, who've been talking about more investment in disaster risk reduction for 3 decades now with limited success. There are very few countries, including my own, where we have ring-fenced money for disaster risk reduction. $6 billion over 5 years. It's not a lot of money for 1.4 billion people, but it is a very good and significant and meaningful start. So how do we have more money for disaster risk reduction? And also in infrastructure, how do we structure infrastructure finance that it nudges us towards resilience and not towards risk? How do we bring together different stakeholders in this whole dialogue on better financing mechanisms for infrastructure development? And finally, you talked about residual risk. How do we come up with new solutions? And I'm sure Rowan will talk about the key pillar of society's institution, which is key institution of society, is insurance. How do we come up with new imaginative ways of dealing with residual risk? Because as Dr. Mishra said in his opening remarks, we are living in times of uncertainty. And we will not be able to reduce the risk to zero. Infinite resilience costs infinite amounts of money that we do not have. So how are we going to deal with losses that may accrue to India's 400 airports that we've built in the last 20 years? Can we come up with some imaginative ways of pooling that risk, addressing that risk? I don't have the answers to that, but that's what we are here for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kamal Kishore. I think it's very important that you highlighted how there is a need for better financing or financing models for these kind of disaster risk reduction. And I'm hoping as we go along, as we talk, we will enable more discussions on this, on how to have better financing and for better financing models for these kind of problems. I would now like to ask Kanta Singh, because we talk about gender resilient kind of a role that we have. So how can this gender sensitive resilient infrastructure projects, how do you think we can prioritize them? Because this is something that I don't think has been much touched upon. We talk about this in large, about infrastructure damage and about compensation mechanisms on, but how do we think we can take proactive steps towards this? I'd like to hear from you on that.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone, Dr. Mishra, Excellencies, and colleagues. I would like to express my gratitude to CDRI for inviting UN Women to be part of this panel discussion. Also prioritizing gender. Otherwise, mostly what you see is this is an afterthought. We also talk about women. So thank you for doing that. And that is how I begin my answer. You start bringing these issues in the mainstream, in the main discussions, main panels. Let me start by answering your question and would like to draw your attention to the launch of a Gender Action Plan under the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. Fortunately, I was part of the launch event in New York last month on 18th, which was launched by UNDRR, UN Women, and other partners that day. The GAP Gender Action Plan provides a framework for integrating gender into the DRR interventions in two major ways. One definitely is gender responsiveness. When we look at the specific needs of men and women, and when we look at particularly infrastructure, we don't invest in understanding what are the specific needs or challenges of women and excluded groups, particularly disabled people, in the DRR projects. That's number one. And the second gap that was highlighted in the Gender Action Plan was investment in women's leadership. So that means women are not recipients of the services and the benefits. They are part of the planning process. They are part of the resilient infrastructure projects. They are also contributing towards that. So those were the two highlights of the Gender Action Plan. But let me also share three other ways in which I can answer your questions. The first one is data. And unless we have disaggregated data on the basis of sex, age, disability, it will be very difficult to plan anything, whether it is infrastructure, services, or also the post-disaster services. So it is very important to map people as per their vulnerabilities. So that's one. So investment is required there. Second is funding. And funding could be private or public sector funding. Gender responsive budgeting is a great tool to look at how much money is being spent on what project, at what level, and how allocations happen, who is the person who is allocating these resources. So I think this is very important, and India has taken a lead on GRB, and like to highlight what MWCD has been doing on GRB. We need to start tracking where this money is going and who it is benefiting. The third one that I mentioned earlier as well, in investing in women's leadership. And India, again, and would like to highlight some of the key strengths of India, though we haven't utilized everything that exists in this country. So let's consider three major possibilities. India has 12 million SHG members, and we haven't reached out to them, and we haven't considered them as leaders in the social field. So these women run businesses, they come together, they plan together, they also have financial experience, but we don't consider them social assets. Women-led early warning systems have been tried in several countries, but in India we still have a long way to do that. But across the globe, I think it's very important to look at the social capital of women. UN Women and UNDRR have supported some of these initiatives in the smaller countries. Of course, those are not comparable to India, but there's no harm in trying some of those things. The high-risk populations and as per the population densities, the early warning systems using women's capital would be very, very important, and they understand the local context. They understand which people live where and what are the issues that they face. Second is the social infrastructure. Housing, community centers, health centers, maternity clinics, schools, child care centers, and emergency shelters. These things are very important, and women are the best judges to tell you where money has to go in creating this social infrastructure. As of 2021, approximately 10 lakhs ASHA workers exist in this country. This is in addition to the 12 million SSG members. So there are 2 lakhs. 2 lakhs is 200,000 ANMs. Now, all these people who are frontline health workers could be trained, and what Kamalji was talking about, their capacities could be built to provide services, but forget about post-disaster. I think they could be involved in the planning processes. Also planning infrastructure, because they know how accessible the infrastructure would be to a woman who's pregnant, who is also handicapped, who is also from a scheduled caste family, how accessible that infrastructure would be. They know everything from the community. This cadre of trained women could be a huge asset for the country, and I think we haven't utilized them fully. The third one is investing in the localization and decentralization of disaster risk is very, very critical. Again, look at the women elected representatives. 1.46 lakh women, 1.46 million women in the country. That is 14 lakhs plus women in this country, and that is 60% of the total elected women representatives in the world. So how do we not consider them as an asset or a huge governance system in the country that exists? And they also have money in their hands because of the decentralization that has happened. Women panchayat leaders have money in their hands. I think they should be used to provide a lot of insights. And I'm not talking about just participation. I'm talking about representation of women at right levels. And many of them are leaders in their own right. So I think that is something that we need to invest in their technical capacity and skills in the area of disaster risk reduction. My last thought is on the livelihoods and also the income generation for women. So we either look at women as victims or beneficiaries. Women are also contributing in terms of income. They are contributing to the GDP. They should also be part of the planning process where they could earn money by investing in the infrastructure, by investing in their shops, by investing in providing services pre and post and during disaster. So I think we should start utilizing and putting women at the center of everything that we do in disaster risk management. And that's what I think Prime Minister meant when he said women-led development. And I'll stop here, but we'll be happy to answer any question. Thank you.
Thank you, Kanta Singh, for giving a very, very different perspective about disaster and how women can play a very important role. I remembered one of the episodes when in one of the cyclone hit areas in Tamil Nadu that there were some women who said that because of the climate change policy, new changes in the policy of the state government, women were taught how to swim because they also have to escape from the disaster, and they were also taught how to rescue children or disabled or physically handicapped people. Like, how do we give? So I think that's where I really saw the example of women playing a very active role. But like you pointed out, this can happen wherever it is feasible and how they can, their potential can be tapped. I think that was very insightful. Thank you so much. I would like to put my next question to Ms. Claudine Kruss. I would like to ask about how is the country, Guatemala, how are they addressing the gaps in infrastructure investment, and how do they support resilience with respect to natural disasters and the possible vulnerabilities that the country is facing? What are the kind of proactive measures that the country is taking? So if you could talk about some experiences and about the policies and resilience measures that have been taking place there.
Hello, good day. Let me start by saying that Dr. Galvez sends her regards and deepest apologies because she was unable to be here right now. You see, in Guatemala, we have right now a very unusually active wildfire season. And she is now coordinators in search and rescue of people that have been lost in one of these wildfire fightings. So I will be representing her. I have a small presentation to address the questions you asked. I'm gonna share it with you now. Okay. Uh, Let me start by picturing how the situation is right now in Guatemala. Uh, the situation is that we have had organized urban expansion without any consideration for knowledge of risk. We have also not applied any adjustments, modified conditions around important infrastructure. Also, we have a situation where occupancy of land already identified as exposed to natural hazards is heightened. Yeah. For example, some important infrastructure has been constructed in a seemingly more problematic place, but in fact it's being constructed in an area which has been declared already as a high-risk area. In Guatemala, the high-risk area declaration imposes prohibitions, so it's a problem. But that can be explained by saying that although much effort has been made to identify the principal natural hazards that affect our territory, this is not the same with respect to the identification of population, infrastructure exposure, vulnerability, and overall risk assessment. But not everything is bad news. Uh, Also, some positive. We have, for example, commitment to different international frameworks. This is the case of the Sendai framework. Guatemala is a signatory of this framework, and as such, we are committed to enforce the corresponding sustainable development goals. From that framework, we take goal number 9, which is build resistant infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation. Guatemala has prioritized, among others, the target number 9.1, develop quality, reliable, sustainable, and resilient infrastructure, including regional and trans-border infrastructure, to support economic development and human well-being, with a focus of affordable and equitable access for all. This year, 2024, President Bernardo Arevalo took office and within his government general policy, it is included that planning and strategic investment in economic infrastructure is fundamental to guarantee the competitiveness of a country in a globalized market. with respect to the environment, social inclusion, and resilience to the exposure to natural hazards. Economic infrastructure covers a set of physical assets such as roads, ports, airports, communications, schools, and health services, but also agricultural collection, centers, archaeological sites, and sacred places, among others, all of which are fundamental to participate, to facilitate economic development and connectivity between countries, regions, and continents, as well as full life. In congruence with the government general policy, the state development provides, prioritizes and commitment to international frameworks of which Guatemala is signatory. CONRED is coordinated a national effort to achieve a national characterization of risk associated to natural hazards that could affect our territory, essential infrastructure, and inhabitants. This understanding of risk and its characterization should be then incorporated planning to include prospective, corrective, and compensatory disaster risk management processes via the already established National Dialogue Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction. The idea is that though the platform and with public-private analysis alliances, we begin identifying gaps in essential infrastructure related expenditures and conducting risk-sensitive budget reviews, and in turn, DRR-aware planification as a transversal axis for development. It is considered that by taking these actions, we are paving the way to promote a practice of investment in infrastructure that is more resilient to natural hazard risk in Guatemala. And with that, I finish. I say thanks again.
Thank you to Amit for the invitation to come. As Dr. Mishra said, so much has happened in the last 6 years. I was lucky enough to be here in Delhi when it all began in 2019, and so much has happened and grown in this organization, and not least on the risk modeling side. It's been picked up by Amal and Dr. Sanella, and of course Kamal, who's also given me some motivation to come up with some good answers right now. So exciting. But I also want to pick up on something else that Dr. Mishra said. He said we should reimagine infrastructure and the future of infrastructure. And I'm going to pick up on that and say, in order to do that, we have to reimagine the future of finance and the integration of finance into infrastructure investment. And that's what this meeting is all about. I'm so excited. Investing today for a resilient tomorrow. And in a sense, it's how do we get that incredible knowledge of ICDRI that we see out on the screens near us into the gearbox of the infrastructure sector and infrastructure financing. Because unless we do, it might as well be a nice book on a bookshelf. So that's what I'm going to talk about. In essence, I'm going to talk about how we need to retrain the invisible hand of economics. How are we going to retrain the invisible hand to essentially do what we know we have to do, which is spend a little bit more money now to get a greater return in the future? And not just an economic return, of course, a return for what this is all ultimately about, human well-being, security, and dignity. And, ladies and gentlemen, it frustrates me because some of us have been talking about this for some time, and we're not getting any better. But who better than CDRI and the forum here to actually begin the new journey? And I'm going to say we're not getting any better because it's a bit like having a medical. This is like having a global medical for our infrastructure. We need to have that medical to find out what's wrong, to decide with the right metrics, to decide how to get better, and to get stronger and fitter. We know we need to. But, ladies and gentlemen, it's just like having a medical, isn't it? As we get older, and I can say this, we tend to put it off because we know we might get a little bit of bad news. We're putting on a bit of weight. We're not doing enough exercise. We know it's going to be painful. We're going to have to spend some money. We have to do things we don't want, and we put it off. And that's basically what we've been doing with infrastructure for such a long time. But if we put it off too long, we risk a crisis, or even worse, a long-term condition. So our challenge now is to take all this great work and get it into the mainstream of infrastructure investment, to get it into the cash flow modeling of who builds bridges and schools and hospitals. Because as soon as you do that properly, the risk-return function does it for itself, and we will get the well-being we need automatically. It is retraining the invisible hand because it's doing exactly what Adam Smith and others said. We should appropriately account for risk to ensure that resilience is valued. But how do we do this? Well, the secret, I think, or one of them, there are many reasons, many ways of doing this. One is, and we'd love to work with CDRI to integrate this great work with similar work going on now with financial regulators. We've talked about disclosure. There is a whole other community of finance and regulation, central banking, that is looking at these issues and desperately needs the knowledge in this area. And I think, Amal, your work is going to be very prescient here. But I'm going to talk about an area, and now I'll answer Shadal's question, about insurance. Not always the most fashionable and exotic of subjects, but it is actually the social and economic bedrock upon which we all rely. It isn't just an industry, as Kamal said, it's an institution of society. Much of our taxation is spent deciding how we're going to pool resources together to protect what we consider valuable. And for all of us as citizens or customers of insurance companies have an entitlement to protection when things go wrong, when we get healthy, when we get unhealthy, when we get old, or when our house or property is destroyed. We hope and expect there'll be some way of ensuring that that is recompensed. And in order to make insurance systems sustainable, actually risk has to be managed structurally. And we've seen how this has happened before. In the 19th century, the climate challenge of the time was urban fire. Massive urban fires in Europe and America. Investors could not invest anymore. They demanded insurance. Insurance was respected at the time. Benjamin Franklin was an insurer. And they did their homework, and through that they said, well, if you're going to have resilient insurance, you need to have building codes and zoning laws and fire departments every 2 miles. And unless you do that, the pool of shared capital that we as a community are providing will not be resilient. And with that, urban morphology from the 1880s to the 1920s was transformed just because of automatic rebuilding, applying these requirements of insurance without which you would not get investment. It's incredible. We've forgotten it completely. Same happening right now, by the way, with solar panels. Solar panels, massive requirement in solar panels around the world to have the energy transition, being whacked by tornado hailstorms, not least in Texas. People can't get insurance, can't get investment. Insurers saying, make the solar panels a bit more resilient and make them tilt vertically when the storms are coming. That'll be fine. Just old lessons. So, and last week in Washington, so pleased that a big initiative, the Insurance Development Forum with BlackRock, has finally married the investment capacity of the insurance sector with the risk understanding of the insurance sector to create a fund focused on resilient infrastructure investment. Love to, but they desperately need Amit, they desperately need your intellectual gearbox. So we can build bridges, but I'm going to come up with one final suggestion, and it's to pick up on the long-term thing. I'm often criticized. I say, oh, insurance is only a one-year thing. You know, we need long-term thinking. Well, half the insurance industry, including the public sector insurance industry, is long-term. Pensions, life insurance, health insurance. Can we not blend the expertise of that side of insurance and actuarial science, of understanding multi-decadal commitments and health and life, with the expertise which has already been brought together between the science and the insurance sector and finance sector on disaster resilience and extremes and managing extremes? So, my invitation, Amit, is through the CDRI, we embark on a new mission. I'm calling for infrastructure life insurance. I see no reason why we cannot bring the industry together to come up with the concept of life and health insurance, which says if you build your infrastructure properly, if you look after it properly, like going to the gym and having the right diet, your insurance will be assured for years, if not decades. And with that, unlocking of finance. As Mia Motley said only last year in Paris, countries which are not insurable are not investable. We have collectively the secret to make society protect itself and mobilize that investment, both in the SIDS, in the global south, but these challenges are almost as acute in the global north. We all share this challenge. We must all come together through the ultimate community product, which is insurance and reinsurance, to build a sustainable future. And how exciting for perhaps the next chapter of CDRI's incredible journey.
Thank you so much, Mr. Douglas. I think that was quite an insight, and we're looking at infrastructure insurance. These are words that were probably not that I was something that I was aware about, but I think it shows a very proactive approach here. Yeah, infrastructure, life, yes, life insurance. So, thank you so much, and it was great hearing about the way ahead with respect to insurance and how we need to look at it, with respect to infrastructure. I would now put a question to Mr. Cohen-Jones, and from him, I would like to understand how can international cooperation really help in driving investments with respect to disaster risk reduction, and how can, and if you can also talk about an example or two that how international cooperation can really help, I think that'll be great.
Well, first of all, thank you very much to have me with you. A lot of wisdom has been laid out already, so I can only make a very modest contribution. And modest it is indeed, because I think when you ask about what role international cooperation can play, I mean, if we look at the numbers, if you look at the demand side, we know plenty of studies are available. We look at an infrastructure investment gap, I mean, basically a need of 6.9 trillion per year. If I look at development cooperation funding, so official development assistance, it's in the range of 0.2 trillion. So basically, if we look at it, it's like sitting on a stool and looking at the Mount Everest. But on the other hand, if you look at the wealth that exists around the world, I mean, just to share, I mean, the top 10 asset managers, they manage around $30 trillion in assets. And so somehow part of the wealth is not flowing to where it should be going. And I think several of the previous speakers have referred to that. And what we're trying to do in Europe with part of the development funding is actually to try and create that link between offer and demand. And we have over the past years moved massively compared to the past into infrastructure investment. This is an area which we had left decades ago and which we are rediscovering now. We have developed in Europe let's say, a broad strategic framework to do so. It's called Global Gateway, which we deliver together with our member states and which is now really the hallmark of what we do in our partnerships with countries in the Pacific, in Southeast Asia, South Asia, in Central Asia, in Africa, and in Latin America and the Caribbean. And the characteristic of Global Gateway is indeed that it has infrastructure investments at the core, but that we look at them really in a 360-degree approach. So we will look at the social angle of it, the environmental sustainability angle in it, the climate adaptation and climate mitigation angle in it, and obviously the financial part of it. So it's quite a complex feat that touches quite a number of the points that were raised before, and we're now starting to see how this is rolled out. But I would want to come up with maybe 3 extra points. The first one is investments in the technology sector, and I think the ambassador of Turkey mentioned it, a number of others as well. We are also drawing in investment in things like Earth observation systems. I mean, we have with our European satellites, Copernicus, the Earth observation component of our EU space program. I mean, a massive wealth of decades and decades of data that are being collected, that are being stored, that are being analyzed for early warning systems and made available. And we are now increasingly working with partners, I mean, Panama or in the Caribbean, the Philippines, to build these kind of hubs where these data can be drawn on and which we then inject basically in early warning systems and therefore also inform decisions to be made by decision makers on what kind of resilient infrastructure you need to build. A second area on which we pay a lot of attention are basically standards and knowledge sharing. We do think that there's a real need to be much more open and publish much more of the technical guidance that is available across the globe on climate proofing of infrastructure. That's why we were so engaged on the G20 principles for quality infrastructure investment and why we are a member of the global Mobilize Your City partnership, because of course 50% of the people across the globe live in big cities, and therefore making sure that we introduce that first of all in the cities is absolutely essential. But we think there's more that needs to be done on organizing this kind of knowledge and standard sharing when it comes to climate proofing infrastructure. And then finally, previous speakers mentioned it as well, it's really about risk coverage. So developing these kind of risk pooling mechanisms is really decisive if we want to support countries helping to ensure them. And we have a few good examples. I'll pick one from Africa, where we have set up or supporting the African Union on its African risk capacity that really helps African Union member states to improve their capacity to better plan, prepare, and respond to extreme weather events. And that's then linked indeed to insurance. And we have seen how this has worked. I mean, if I take Southern Africa, basically these drought insurance policies that were built and designed by the African risk capacity, which we supported, have really been triggered in a useful way with the recent drought emergencies that we saw in Zambia, in Zimbabwe, in Malawi, and so on. So these are basically the 4 big pillars that we pursue under Global Gateway. It's the investment in infrastructure and how we, through de-risking mechanisms, can leverage much more private funding to flow into these investment needs. It's investment in technology, it's investment in knowledge sharing, and it's investment indeed in insurance. And I do want to stop by a big word of thanks to, of course, Kamal, who was the father of all of this, but in general to the I mean, to the CDRI. I think it's absolutely fabulous that we have this, and this creates basically the community of practice of all those engaged on this. I think there are a number of very interesting programs rolled out by the CDRI, which we are happy to be part of, and you can count on an increasing mobilization of Europe and our member states, Team Europe, to be part of this. By the way, one of the member states, France, is the upcoming co-chair of the CDRI Governing Council. So exciting to be here with you. Thanks a lot for having me with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. I think it is very encouraging to hear stories of international cooperation and how Europe is actually also helping out other countries in looking at early warning systems. And also another important thing that you mentioned about investments and also collecting data from Earth observation systems. And I think that's really something that we need to look at. I think that's something that was very insightful. Thank you for your time. And I think we have put across the questions, but there are a few things that have emerged out of this discussion, which probably I want to hear from. I mean, any of you could answer. Because we are looking at various spectrums. We're looking at gender resilience, we're looking at risk insurance, we're looking at investments in infrastructure, in agriculture, fintech. Today, as we look at disaster, which is like more increasing as we are going along in different parts of the world, how equipped do you think are we to deal with the situation better than probably a decade ago? What kind of changes have you witnessed as experts, which have been very proactive towards reducing or risk reduction, when you look at risk reduction, not just with respect to infrastructure investment, but also other aspects of climate change? I mean, if any of you would like to respond to that question.
Well, I think we are better and we are worse. We are better in terms of saving lives. We do a much better job, all the countries presented here, in terms of responding to an event. That doesn't mean that we've done everything that needs to be done in terms of reducing the risk of mortality. But we are probably a lot worse in terms of losing capital assets, economic output, losing livelihood at a massive scale. So on that, we are not better. We have accumulated a great amount of risk.
Maybe I'll just respond briefly as well, because I think, I mean, what we do have now that is a huge asset to what we're trying to achieve is the advances in technology, and I think particularly the role of artificial intelligence, machine learning, that can enable us to think and analyze data in this more systems approach way that is needed. So I think in that respect, that is a real positive for what we need to achieve. But I think, and it's going back to the point that Kamal made earlier, this requires interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary approaches working across different, whether it's different government ministries, different sectors, different, whether you're public, private, and that is very challenging. We know that people, it's not that people don't necessarily want to collaborate, but it often is the hardest thing to actually deliver and facilitate. So I think that's where we really need really strong, deep determination to drive those changes at the sort of partnership and collaborative level.
May I? Yes. I think a couple of things have changed. There's better awareness. There's better convening now to talk about different issues. Technology has changed, and I think there are some good practices that have emerged from different countries. What, however, hasn't changed is money in the hands of women, women's issues not being centralized or put at the core of where planning happens. And if I may say so, I think men smell money. Wherever there's money, you will find men there. Women take time to understand what's happening. Look at COP. You'll find 28 men and 1 woman standing there in black suits and green ties and private planes. And I think women take time to understand where money is going to go in next 10 years. But that is where they need to be, and that's where they start putting their thoughts and their insights into infrastructure development, into resilience, into participation of different communities as per their needs. And that is my thought. I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
Yes, just one word. I think we all know that climate crisis is behind the increasing of the natural disasters in latest decades. I say climate crisis, not climate change, because we are in the crisis now. So we, the humanity, the generation, our generation is responsible for this, because instead of investing today for more resilient tomorrow, driven by greed, we just consume everything, and we have left nothing to our future generations and to our future. So this is the main problem we have to deal with. But nothing is too late. We are not too late for this. We can start resilient cities.
Thank you so much. I think it was a very interesting session and interesting deliberations, and I'm sure today and between today and tomorrow, I hope to hear a lot more of exchange of discussions and probably leading to more adaptation models that spread across to the world and for a better world. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists, for a brilliant discussion, and thank you, Ms. Sharda, for your expert conduct of the session. I would now request Ms. Sharda, our moderator, to present certificates of appreciation to our esteemed panelists. I would also like to thank Ms. Sharda. So this certificate is for you, ma'am. To thank you all for your presence here. Friends, we will recommence the day's proceedings after a 15 minutes break. We invite you to enjoy the refreshments served outside. Please exit the hall, take the escalators to go down a level. Tea would be on your left. Thank you.